Okay, we're getting to my. All right, so the defense minister that we talked about last time, Shoigu, he had disappeared and nobody had seen him for a few weeks. He's resurfaced, and he held a joint press conference with the chief of the general staff, and his assessment was, on the whole, the main goals of the first stage, blah, blah, blah. That's what we've been hearing. And so he's sticking with the line. A fact checker just says this is false and misleading. So on we go. When we left off last week, we left Putin at the year 1999, as he suddenly inherits all the power, the ultimate power just falls into his lap, and we documented how he got that. He'd been involved in the first Chechen war as the director of the FSB, and when he was on the Security Council and when he was prime minister. So he knew the Chechen war. In 1999, just as he was taking power, there were these bombing of the apartment buildings, and in his biography, he was, in which he cooperated, he asked if he deliberately did it as a false flag operation. And he said, "What, blowing up? No, are you insane?" And the question that we ended with was his tough attitude in Chechnya, a foreshadow of what he was going to do, because he said he was rolling the dice. He was going to go for it, and if it didn't turn out well, they could get rid of me, and that all the people that had tried to clean up in the first Chechen war were amateurish, but he was going to go in and do it right. And he just destroyed Grozny, just destroyed it. And the Chechen rebels, they struck back with that Moscow theater kidnapping of a whole audience, over 300 people. We reviewed that last time. 200 people died, some of it maybe by the gas that they pumped in, which probably was related to fentanyl. But the terrorism continued. A school siege, 330 people died, more than in the theater. And so finally Putin said, we're taking over, we're sealing borders, we're striking the separatists, and the leaders were killed. And it was a ruthless breakdown, and he finally handed power over to a Chechen warlord whose father had been a crony of Putin, and he's been in charge ever since, creating a cult of personality as one of these charismatic alpha warlords that keep popping up throughout world history. We're still dealing with them, unfortunately. So now we're going to go into fresh territory, just to set the stage. He also had a terrible problem with the economy. And who did he turn to? Anatoly Chubais was one of his chief advisors. He had worked with Putin in the 90s and had been in charge of the privatization. And he had been a crony with Putin, following him in the FSB, as which was the successor to the KGB. So Chubais and Putin go way back. I bring it up first because this week he made the news, and whenever we're doing the history and we run across important people, I do Ella, a quick fast forward to what's going on now, so you can see the relevance. We'll go back to 1999 in just a second, but just this week, Chubas is the highest official to cut Kremlin ties. And as I'm going to tell you, he was the economic reformer that did the unpopular privatization. Right now, he's got a titular job as a presidential envoy on sustainable development. And this week, he left the country for Turkey. And obviously, he's no longer in Putin's inner circle, but he has been a chum of Putin since the mid-90s, and Putin has been loyal to him. So he's lost this guy's support. So back in the early 90s, when the economy was adrift after the Soviet government, the communists had owned all the property. So how are they going to turn it over? And they gave everybody a share. Every citizen got some kind of share that they could deal with, but those shares were quickly bought up by other people, economic predators, really, who took over huge shares and gave people resources to buy food. That was what was going on. So Chubas is here in the mid-90s, and who consulted? He asked the economists from Harvard, Jeffrey Sachs being among them, to come and help. And it was inevitable when so much money was moving around, but there was much corruption, as the nation laid out in its investigation.
Excuse me. So that girl that we met on the cruise, who supported Putin wholeheartedly, do you think that like this economic reform was part of she got a dacha, and some people got little bitty dachas,
Yeah, they were given shares, and they were given land. So what are you going to do? And so they threw spaghetti against the wall to privatize property and get a market economy going, whatever worked. That's right, property and shares. So he worked with the Harvard boys, but it was really unpopular. The privatization process, people had to sell their shares, and pretty soon the oligarchs wound up with all the money. And there was a lot of public protest against the redhead, as he was called. His mother was Jewish and a Lithuanian, and that may have been where he got his red hair. And so Putin kept him around. He's been loyal to this guy. And so when he no longer could manage the economy because of all the opposition, he was given the new position, chief of the unified energy system. So this was around the year 2000. Putin's now been in office for about a year. And who is he with? He is with Leonid Kuchma, who at that time was the president of the Ukraine. And we'll be talking about that.
What is he? Is he the one on the top or to the left?
So Chubas is on the top, and Kuchma is on the left. Okay. And he continued to survive after that job as the envoy on sustainable development, and he keeps popping up. He is a survivor if there ever was one. Here he is with Medvedev and Xi. And then he moves on and becomes a chairman of a corporation. And here they're visiting a pipe rolling plant. He resigned from that position in 2020 and just became in charge of sustainable economic development. And that's what he resigned from last week. Okay, influential billionaire number 2, oligarch, Roman Abramovich. He's not, he has achieved some celebrity, which I'll get to in just a second. Right now, though, in this moment, I'm fast forwarding again to the current moment. He's an expat. He lives in London. And he stepped forward suddenly to volunteer as the people's diplomat. He usually keeps a low profile on politics. He's a celebrity, but he doesn't speak out about politics. But his presence was requested by the Ukrainians, because he still has influence, and I'll tell you why. He also, like Chubias, was a member of Yeltsin's inner circle. And here he is as a very young man. And he palled around with Putin at that time. And he and the Knots owned Channel 1. And he basically turned it back over to the Russian state for propaganda purposes, though he continued to own it. So he has had a working relationship through Putin until very recently, when he sold his interest in this mouthpiece that's been Putin's. Also, he contributed to turning his share of oil over to the state, to Gazprom. And so he has been a Putin enabler. But this is interesting, and it's led me to a little tangent here, Ella. I ran into this statue of Abramovich in Israel. That's interesting. So I go down these rabbit holes, and I think this is an interesting one because it's going to explain a few things that have been puzzling me. But just remember, 1 million Russian Jews immigrated to Israel since the 1980s. 3 times more than to the United States. We in Walnut Creek have a Russian Jewish immigration population here, somewhere in with our kids in high school. But when 1 million Jews went to Russia, they comprised 15% of the population, and they moved Israeli politics to the right, to the disappointment of many of us. They're pro-military, they're very anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian, they're pro-business, and they're really anti-socialist because of their experience in the Soviet Union. Interestingly enough, they're secular when it comes to religion, which is a moderating factor on the influence of the religious right. And so I want to look at the geopolitical considerations because Israel is not condemning Putin in the Ukraine. And that has puzzled me. And I decided, since I was on Abramovich, I would deal with it. What are the mutual goals? they were pioneered by Netanyahu, and Naftali Bennett, his successor as prime minister, is following in the footsteps. He just met with Putin in Sochi in 2021. And Israel's goal is to maintain their freedom of action in Syria. Their interest is to counter the Iranian attempts to bolster Assad. And what's Russia getting out of this odd triangle? They want to expand their sphere of influence in the Mediterranean. And so Israel is part of this delicate balance, and which is why they're not joining the USA and NATO in publicly criticizing Putin. So why is Russia so interested in Syria? Remember your geography and history. This warm water port, Sevastopol in Crimea, has been part of Russia's military strategy since the time of the czars. And that's certainly one motivation for their recent annexation of Crimea. But you notice here you got the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles and the Sea of Marmor. And so this is a very strategic a couple of passageways for the Russia's warm water port. So they really want a military presence on the other side of these potential blockages. And they have one now. They've been given a port in Syria. And if anybody went and tried to close that off, they could attack from their port in Syria. And this clarifies for me what their role is in Syria and what their game is. And so they're in a delicate dance with Iran, too, because Iran also wants to support Assad, but Russia's a little leery of Iran. So you've got yet another dance partner in this very complicated ballet. So Netanyahu and Putin established a tight bond, and Netanyahu was the only Western leader invited to the Victory Day parade in 2018, celebrating the victory over Germany. And on the other hand, Putin has visited Israel and declared his friendship for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. This was the occasion in 2020 celebrating the liberation of Auschwitz. And there's pressure in Eastern Europe to stop building statues honoring the Red Army, the Communist Army, the Soviet Army. However, Israel, out of gratitude, and genuinely felt gratitude, and we've talked to survivors of World War II who worked with the Red Army, a wonderful Lithuanian woman, and the Red Army was the hero of her life. And so they have no problem continuing to erect statues in Israel honoring the Red Army. And you will remember from our previous session, Putin has made the victory over Nazi Germany come alive again in everyday posters and propaganda. It's for him. It was Russia's sparkling moment. And Naftali Bennett, even though he ousted Netanyahu, has continued the policies, realizing what Israel's interest is in Syria. And they had a very extended, consequential meeting just last October. So this relationship is alive and well. Okay, back to Abramovich. Abramovich could see the writing on the wall, and he basically cashed out and handed his stuff over to Putin, his TV station and all his interest in and holdings in natural resources. And so I said he was a celebrity. Soccer fans will know him. Our son Tim knows him because he's a huge soccer fan, as is Abramovich. And this is him after he's cashed out. And he finally buys a team, Chelsea. And this is a big deal now. He owns one of the prominent soccer teams in London. And what's he going to do? And he is neutralizing his shares somehow. He's taking some kind of action. We had an encounter with Abramovich on a family vacation to Scotland, which overlapped with his family vacation on his royal yacht through Scotland. These are the Hebrides and Inner Hebrides, and my family. My middle name's McNeil, is from the Outer Hebrides. So we were traveling around here. And we were on the Isle of Arran, going to a distillery, and somewhere on one of our ferry rides, we saw what was his yacht. I didn't take this picture, but this is the yacht that we saw. And here he is getting off in the town where the distillery was. Here he is with his wife on his yacht. So he has continued, though, to cooperate with Putin. And it was enough of a cooperation for recently the British and the European sanctions to include him, and based on decades of obtaining financial benefits from Putin. So that's why he steps forward now. And he is putting himself forward as the people's diplomat. And so I thought the history of this guy was worth a flash forward to see what's going on now, because he's like he was a player with Yeltsin, he's still a player. And the Ukrainians want him to be a mediator. So fascinating. So back to 1999. We've covered Putin dealing with 8 years of failure to squelch the Chechen rebellion. Now what happens? And for us, we kind of remember our intervention in Kosovo in 1999, but it was a NATO unilateral intervention. The previous intervention in Bosnia against the Serbs had been truly international and got UN approval and avoided the Soviet veto. But okay, Carol's coming back in. And avoided the Soviet veto in Bosnia, but in Kosovo, the Russian veto, I should say. The Russians were going to veto that one. And so NATO did it unilaterally against the fellow Slavs. This is in Putin's mind. And we remember there was nasty stuff going on the Serbian part. There'd been the massacres in Sarajevo of Bosnians, and we thought the same thing was going to happen in Kosovo. And NATO intervened. And so Putin, though, looked at this and was shocked that in the heart of Europe, there would be use of combat aircraft and missiles that had not received UN approval. And he interpreted that, perhaps paranoid, as an implied threat to Russia itself. I'm bringing all this up not to justify or excuse Putin. What I'm trying to do is look at the way he has interpreted history, as he wrote in that 20-page essay last July, and trying to figure out where it comes from and what's in his mind, because his mind is upsetting the world and killing a lot of people. So I'm not trying to justify it. And at best, I'm trying to understand what were his influences, what molded him and pushed him along the path, the disturbing path that he's taken. So he though forgave us, and at 9/11, Putin visited New York 2 months after 9/11 with his wife, who we met in previous episodes. And he toured the country at that time, and was a admirer of America. He was fighting Muslim extremists, and now America was too. And so there was a third thing, though, that really upset Putin. And in this event, I would have had, I was as upset as Putin was, I imagine. It was the American defiance of the United Nations, and certainly a Russian veto in our second Iraq war, not the first, but the second Iraq war by Bush the younger. That was very disturbing to me. And if I had to rate all the influences on Putin and give them a number score, right? You can do a long list and it looks like everything's equal. But if you weighted this, I think this was a 10 in Putin's mind. If America defy the United Nations, and I think a lot of us thought at the time, this is really a bad precedent. And here we are, the chicken has come home to roost, because it made Putin very angry. And so this gets to the larger question of what influences world leaders. And this whole concept of the status of great powers and what great powers can get away with. And as Putin has said over and over again, the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was Russia, the Russian Empire and Russian influence falling. And so in his mind, he wants to restore the hegemony that Russia once held as a great power. And they've been holding that. They've been a great power for 300 years since Peter the Great. And so he wants to make Russia great again. And this concern about status is an emotional concern, right? It defies rationality. And you see the same thing with China. China was a great power for millennia, not centuries. And they have the same feeling. They talk about the 150 years of disgrace and suppression by the West, the Opium Wars. And so there's a lot of grudges being held against the West. And so we can't be totally surprised that China is supporting, at least for the moment, Putin. And the feeling Putin had was that America was certainly a great power, and it was treating the whole world as its sphere of influence. And Libya and Syria, 10 years later, are going to evoke the same kind of resentment in Putin.
Can I say something?
Yes.
The Kosovo thing doesn't make any sense because Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia. That has nothing to do with Russia's sphere of influence. Wasn't the president of Yugoslavia very much, independent and not a pawn of the Russians?
Well, but now we're past Yugoslavia, right? We're dealing with the countries of Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia. They're all countries now after the fall of the Soviet Union and the breakup of Yugoslavia.
Yeah,
so,
but the thing is that like him going into Chechnya, they're Sunnis, right? And aligning himself with Syria, they're Shias. That makes sense. He's got a Shia alliance rather than, because the Chechens are Sunnis. Now, what were the Muslims in Yugoslavia? They're Sunni, right? They're not Shia.
Well, I don't think that had anything to do with it in Putin's thinking. Putin is thinking not in religious terms or identities like you're thinking. He's thinking in geopolitical terms. He wants a port in the Mediterranean, and it doesn't. And he's playing a difficult balancing game with Iran, who is a supporter of Assad, really their patron. And I'm admitting somebody back in. Welcome back. And so those considerations, it's complex enough at this moment, but I don't think that enters Putin's thinking at all, what sect they are or whether it makes sense. His concern is on larger geopolitical concerns. And this is what the realists who analyze foreign policy emphasize. The identity stuff is trumped by a warm water presence in the Mediterranean. Okay, moving on. He's been playing footsie with the oligarchs now since he arrived in 1999, but finally he makes a decisive move against the oligarchs. This guy, Khodorkovsky, had become prominent, and at a meeting that Putin had with the head oligarchs, the most powerful oligarchs, he had criticized Putin and suggested that he was going to run against him. Big mistake. Big mistake. He's arrested on trumped up charges at the airport. And he is put in jail and tried in a cage. And here, Putin in 2003, for all the reasons that we've cited, all the pressures that he was under since 1999, he just said, you know what, to deal with all this stuff and to deal with the challenges of foreign policy, I'm not gonna waste my time on democracy. And so he was gonna, there'd be democracy in form, but he was gonna rig it. And his arresting of the oligarchs was the moment when the world should have realized that this guy is in the tradition of the history of Russia, going back to Ivan the Terrible. He is reasserting a new order. Now, I want to turn the page a little bit and look at religion. And my segue to religion is going to be another oligarch, Pugachev. Here's Pugachev. And he was also a confidant of Yeltsin. So you can see that Yeltsin's kitchen cabinet had connections with Putin when he was leader of the FSB on his way up to become first president and then prime minister. So, or prime minister and then president. So, who is Pugachev? He was said to be the Kremlin's banker, but I've read a short summary of his biography on Wikipedia, and this guy is a grifter. He is taken to court on fraud charges a handful of times on his way up. But he became, through guile, a power broker in the Kremlin. And he spoke to, in his memory, Putin almost every day as Putin was on his way up. And he even claims he's one of the troika, the threesome, that chose Putin, the other two being Yeltsin's daughter and her husband. He even claimed that he was the one that suggested that Putin be the guy. So when Putin takes power, this guy is there, and he's there for Putin for 10 years, his story has changed because they had a big falling out 10 years later, and Pugachev fled to London, and then he started talking about Putin, and he's not strategic. He lives for the day. He has no plans. He didn't want to become president. I thought of it. Here's Pugachev and Putin in better days under the shadow of Yeltsin, and that he didn't plan to remain in government at all. And Putin said in the biography that we reviewed, written in the year 2000, that he was willing to be thrown out if he failed in Chechnya. So that matches. But here's the religious connection. Pugachev was religious. And he took Putin to an Orthodox church. And he advised him, because Putin didn't know anything about religion. You remember in his biography, that was one of the two dogs that didn't bark, one being the Ukraine, which he only mentions in the context of a ski vacation, and the other is religion. He doesn't say anything about religion, which is going to be striking as we move forward. But he says to Putin that what you've got to do now is prostrate yourself as an act of contrition. It's part of the church. And Putin refused. He said, why should I? I'm the president of the Russian Federation. I have nothing to ask forgiveness for. I just mentioned that. So religion and the Orthodox Church, and what's their game? Well, in 2001, the Orthodox Church canonized this guy, Ushakov. He was a deeply religious admiral in the 18th century who'd won a big battle in Crimea and pushed the Ottomans back to Istanbul. And he supervised the construction of naval bases and, first of all, Sevastopol, but look at this, in the docks of Kherson. Kherson is one of the first cities that the Russian troops captured. And we'll see as they retreat, if they retreat from Kherson, that may be the bridge from Russia to Crimea. They may keep it, but we'll see if they perform the same kind of atrocities that we're reading about in this morning's paper in Kherson. But Ushakov built that for the Navy. Stalin was the first one to use Ushakov. He rehabilitated Ushakov after Russia was attacked by Germany in 1941. And here he sees, you can see him seizing on the metaphor of the great Ushakov. And you remember Stalin was at one point a theology student in Georgia. And so he knew a little bit about saints and how the church picked them. And so he also rehabilitated the Orthodox Church, which had been anathema to strict communist ideology, the opiate of the masses, as Marx said. But when Hitler was coming, it was all hands on deck, and Stalin did everything he could to puff up the church. He even created a medal for outstanding service called the Order of Ushakov. And why is that important now? This is Putin in this gigantic 100,000 people rally, mass rally that he held last month in Moscow. And here he quotes Ushakov. Ushakov once said the storms of war would glorify Russia. That is how it was in his time, and that is how it is today and will always be. So the links between the Orthodox Church and the security forces were first forged under Stalin. And when communism fell in 1990, they grew even stronger. So the relationship between the Orthodox Church and the FSB, both radically conservative institutions in the society, terribly right-wing, you can say almost fascist. That was forged, and the Orthodox Church has been an active participant in what some are terming a new cult of war, a cult of war. And we have to understand what's going on in the brains of the Russian people, because now that Putin has controlled the media and Channel One, they get all this stuff unrelenting. Now, the younger people can escape it with social media, and a lot of younger people have VPNs so they can get out of the censorship. And so it's mostly older people that are exposed to this daily propaganda. And there's one show on Sunday night that what this guy says, it makes me think of Joseph Goebbels and the propaganda during Hitler's time. Every Sunday night, what they hear, and so just recently, the church and the state and the military built this new military religious a political complex, built a cathedral of the Russian armed forces. And the floor is made, I think, from melted down German tanks. And the Guardian has called it the Angels and Artillery, a cathedral to Russia's new national identity. They've gone that far.
Where is it?
It's on the outskirts of Moscow. I think it's about 50 miles out. And here it is, the whole layout of this complex. And there was a controversial mosaic that was supposed to be rolled out to glorify the invasion of Georgia and the annexation of the Crimea in 2014. But that was withheld by Putin as being too immodest at this point in time. But here it is, this mosaic, and you can see Putin and Shoigu, our Tuvan defense chief, are prominent in the mosaic. And one's to Georgia and one's to Crimea. But not for public viewing yet. But there is a mosaic that shows the Russian role in the Syrian civil war, with Christian angels smiling down on Russian soldiers defending a Shia, although it's some people call Assad's brand of Shiism a cult. So things don't make sense. They don't in strictly rational terms. The only way to explain this is to look at the geopolitical, cynical, realist way of the world. And it's remember, Syria's has been a traditional foe of Israel, and Russia is giving Israel the green light to do their counter intelligence work against the Iranians. So go figure, it makes no sense. This is the patriarch. He's called Putin a miracle of God, a willing supporter in this cult of war. And in his mind, the chief horror is the horror of gay pride marches. And we know Putin is very public in his opposition and homophobia. Just a quick word and I'll finish. When we were visiting Moscow, we visited this cathedral, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. It had a very interesting history. It was built in 1883, but the communists, being anti-religion, blew up this magnificent cathedral in 1931. It's been rebuilt, but what did the communists have in mind? This was their dream. They were going to build a statue of Lenin, bigger than the Statue of Liberty. This was going to be taller than the Empire State Building, the planned palace of communism. But it never took off. It was impractical. They did dig a foundation. And what did they turn it into? They turned it into, you can't tell from this picture, maybe this picture, they turned it into a swimming pool. The largest heated swimming pools in the world. But that proved very costly and impractical to maintain. So with the fall of communism, they started rebuilding the church, and it's open. This is what one critic says. And we visited it. It's very shiny inside. And I had, I don't know about you, Aiko, there was nothing sacred about it. It was meant to dazzle. But as the Soviet Union was winding down in the 1980s, the church emerged and started restoring churches. We visited a lot of churches, and what we were always told by our guides was, this one was built by this oligarch, right? Well, when we get to the Church of Christ the Savior, our guide says, and this building was paid for in part by and sponsored by Vladimir Putin. But I think that one of his deals with the oligarchs is, I won't throw the rest of you in jail, but you've got to do your share and go out and start building churches. I can't tell you how many times we went into a church and were told the name of the oligarch who rebuilt it. So the church is playing a decisive role in national consciousness, and Putin is wielding religion as an instrument for the traditional conscious patriotism. And I think that's, just a couple of more religious related things. In 2005, they created the ribbon of St. George, who slew the dragon, a military saint venerated by the Orthodox, and especially in the context, again, of the war against Hitler's Germany, which is celebrated every day, everywhere in Russia. And what about Ushakov? After he was canonized, he later became the saint of nuclear-armed long-distance bombers. I kid you not. In 2007, Putin told a press conference in Moscow that nuclear weapons and Orthodox Christianity were the two pillars of Russian society. The one guaranteeing the country's external security and nuclear weapons, the other its moral health. And I suppose that's a good place to end today. Any questions from anybody?
I was wondering, the Russian Orthodox Church, is it a traditional Christian philosophy, or have they veered off into more occultish type of ideology?
Well, traditionally, with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, they picked up the mantle of Orthodox Christianity. So the Russian church has advertised itself since Ivan the Terrible as the third Rome. Remember, the first church was the Vatican in Rome, and then when the Roman Empire split, Constantinople became the second Rome. And when it fell to the Muslims 1,000 years later, then Russia said, "Well, we're the third Rome." So they continued the tradition. There were two churches, one in Rome and one in Constantinople. One was a Roman Catholic, the other was Greek Orthodox. And so they continued as best they could the Greek Orthodox from Moscow, which at that time was just a upstart, but they very quickly, based on the fur trade and bread baskets of the Volga and the Ukraine, became a power, especially with Peter the Great. Now, at that time of Peter the Great, there was a meeting between the Orthodox priests in Kiev, who had resurfaced after, and I think they had been tolerated by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, who controlled Kiev. They had been tolerated as a minority religion, even though Poland and Lithuania were Roman Catholic. And so it was Kiev that kept the idea of Orthodox Christianity alive in the Ukraine, and the church leaders in Kiev talked to the church leaders in Moscow at the time of Peter the Great and said, "Well, here's our tradition," and they kind of melded the two traditions. Remember, Moscow had inherited the church tradition from Novgorod, not directly from Kiev at all. So it's very complicated about what they believed by then, and there were many different versions, but they tried to meld them at the time of Peter the Great. But certainly, whatever melding they came up with is not what we see in Russia now. It has been twisted by, first of all, the enforced cessation of the church during the 70 years of communist rule, and now in a very distorted version that the Orthodox Church and Putin have cooked up. What it was in the 90s and the version that emerged that had been subliminal, but been underground. The church survived, but it had to be underground. And what kind of changes it underwent, I can't tell you. But traditional Orthodox Christianity has, after the fall of Constantinople, it's survived in various places around the Mediterranean. Even the Coptic Church in Egypt is its own variety that harkens back to Constantinople. But there are many different splinter Orthodox churches, just like we have many different splinter versions of Western Christianity. now, but they're all sprinkled around the Mediterranean. I think Lebanon has its own version. Armenia, Georgia, Serbia. So I can't answer your question directly with a simple answer, but that's my first stab at a complicated one.
Oh, thank you.
So, how does Putin, I mean, we think that Putin went into Syria because he wants that other port to attack from the east in case we block off the Dardanelles. But how does Putin justify going into Syria to his people on his sites where they're spewing out propaganda?
Well, I think what he's selling now in his propaganda is anti-Americanism.
Well, no, wait, it's anti-Nazi in Ukraine, anti-Americanism where?
In Syria. So I think at the time they went into Syria, America had been dabbling right in the Arab Spring, and we forced out Mubarak. Obama did that, and when Putin sees any despot leader forced out of power by America, that raises his hackles. Ever since our illegal invasion of Iraq. And I think that was what's in his mind, because he was really upset when we overthrew Gaddafi. He identifies with any autocrat that America is pressuring. And I think that's the primary ideological way he's selling this to his people as anti-Americanism, that we were, Obama had drew a red line with poisonous gas, remember? And then they used poisonous gas, and Russia stepped in at that point and said, America will take care of this. And they persuaded Assad with friendly persuasion, hey, we're going to help you, but let's cool it on the poisonous gas. And what that did in Putin's mind was remove America as a player, and that he would take over that role because it was in his geopolitical interest primarily. But I think he's selling it as keeping America from mucking around in anywhere near our warm water port.
Our warm water port, meaning Syria.
Meaning Russia's warm water port in
Which
Syria now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. See y'all next week, and we will get to 2004 in the Ukraine, where just like Putin played his card against Khodorkovsky and put him on trial, now he is revealing his hand and his priorities when it comes to territories that used to belong to the Soviet Union but no longer do. And he thinks in 2004 that his intervention in the Ukraine is going to reattach Ukraine.
You mean 2014?
No, 2004. We got to do 2004, believe
That
me.
was Georgia, though, not Ukraine.
2004 was the Orange Revolution. Wait for it. So 2004 was the Orange Revolution, and next week you'll learn that this was an essential preliminary before you could get to 2014. We're taking this year by year and step by step in Ukraine's history. And 2004 is a pivotal year because remember, right after Russia fell, the Soviet Federation joined with Belarus in a informal alliance between former members of the Soviet Union. And they said, hey, Ukraine, you come and join us. And then the three major European components of the former Soviet Union will still be together. And Ukraine said, no deal, no deal. And we'll cover that in more detail next week. Ukraine refused to join with Belarus and the new Russia Federation in this alliance of former Soviet states. So it's only Belarus and Russia. And in 2004, Putin tries to correct that, and in a very spectacular way that involves poisoning. Poison.
Huh.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
John.